In the summer of 1987, 12-year-old Marcus Hartwell had everything a child could dream of. Wealth, a loving family, a future brighter than the sun itself. But on the night of August 15th, he vanished from his locked bedroom on the third floor of the Hartwell estate. No ransom note, no signs of struggle, no body ever found. For 37 years, this case has destroyed careers, shattered families, and exposed one of the most sophisticated child trafficking operations in American history. This is the story of the children who vanished into the network and the FBI agent who brought them home.
The Hartwell estate sits on 47 acres of Connecticut's most pristine countryside. In 1987, it was home to one of America's wealthiest families and to a boy who seemed to have it all. Marcus Jonathan Hartwell wasn't just wealthy, he was exceptional. Straight A's, debate team captain, a violin prodigy. But in the world of organized child trafficking, exceptional children are the most valuable commodity. Because predators don't just want any child, they want the best. August 15th, 1987 started like any other Saturday. Marcus had swim practice, then his weekly tutoring session with Professor Gerald Whitmore, a man the Hartwell family trusted completely. That evening at dinner, Marcus barely touched his food. His mother, Elizabeth, noticed he seemed distracted, scared even. When she asked what was wrong, Marcus looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. And then he asked a question that would haunt her forever. "Mom, if I tell you a secret, will you promise you won't let him take me?" Elizabeth never got to hear that secret. Marcus's father, Richard, interrupted. There was a business call. Dinner ended abruptly. Marcus went upstairs. It was 8:47 p.m. Marcus's younger sister, 9-year-old Sophie, watched him enter his bedroom. She remembers him looking back at her with tears in his eyes. He mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." At 10:25 p.m., Elizabeth went to check on her son. She knocked, no answer. When she opened the door, he was gone. But here's what the local police initially missed. Here's what would eventually expose an international trafficking network. On the windowsill, barely visible, were fresh scratches, not from forced entry, but from something being carefully installed, a specialized lock-release mechanism that could only be operated from outside. The room wasn't locked from the inside, it was staged to look that way. And on Marcus's nightstand, investigators found a glass of milk, half drunk. When it was finally tested 3 days later, it contained traces of rohypnol, a powerful sedative. Marcus hadn't vanished, he'd been drugged, and someone with a key had taken him while his family slept downstairs.
When Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the Hartwell estate, she suspected a runaway, a kidnapping at worst. What she found was evidence of something far more organized, far more sinister. The lock mechanism, the sedative, the complete lack of physical struggle. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. This was planned, professional, surgical. And Chen had seen this before. 2 years earlier, in Vermont, 12-year-old David Chen, no relation, had vanished from his locked bedroom. Same scenario, no evidence, no leads. Case went cold. Detective Chen requested every unsolved child disappearance case in the Northeast from the past decade. What arrived made her blood run cold. 7 cases, 7 boys between ages 10 to 13, all from wealthy families, all exceptional students, all vanished from locked bedrooms with no evidence. 1979, Timothy Walsh, Portland, Maine, gifted pianist, vanished. 1981, David Chen, Burlington, Vermont, math prodigy, vanished. 1983, James Rodriguez, Hartford, Connecticut, young chess champion, vanished. 1985, Michael Zhang, Boston, Massachusetts, science competition winner, vanished. Every 2 years, like clockwork. But it was the profile of these children that revealed the trafficking operation's true nature. These weren't random targets. Someone was identifying gifted children from wealthy families, studying them, grooming them, and taking them to order. Because in the dark world of international child trafficking, exceptional children command exceptional prices. Detective Chen called the FBI. Within hours, Special Agent Douglas Morton arrived. Morton ran the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. He'd been hunting trafficking networks for 20 years. And when Morton saw Chen's evidence board, he recognized something, a signature, a method, a network he'd been chasing since 1975. We called them the Collectors, an organized group that specialized in acquiring gifted children for wealthy buyers overseas. We'd shut down cells, arrested recruiters, but we'd never found the top, never found where the children were taken. Until now. On day 3 of the investigation, a canine unit found something hidden behind a false wall in the estate's wine cellar, a tunnel. The tunnel ran beneath the estate, through the gardens, emerging half a mile away in an abandoned groundskeeper's cottage. The cottage had been purchased 15 years earlier by a shell company. No taxes paid, no utilities, officially abandoned. But someone had been using it, recently. Inside, FBI agents found a staging area, sleeping drugs, restraints, a van registered to a fake name, and surveillance equipment pointed directly at the Hartwell estate. Marcus had been watched for months, every movement documented, every routine mapped. But it was what they found in the back room that changed everything. A computer, and on that computer, files. Hundreds of files, children's profiles, medical records, psychological assessments, academic achievements, and photographs. Not just of the 7 missing boys, but of 43 other children, currently alive, currently being watched, currently being groomed for acquisition. The collectors weren't done. They were just getting started. But they'd made their first mistake. They'd left evidence, a digital trail, and Morton was going to follow it straight to the source.
Professor Gerald Whitmore had tutored Marcus Hartwell for 2 years. Every Saturday, 2 hours, mathematics and science. The Hartwell family trusted him completely. He came highly recommended, impeccable credentials, background check cleared, references glowing. All of it fabricated. When FBI agents arrived at Whitmore's campus office, they found it cleaned out. When they went to his apartment, they found it abandoned. Gerald Whitmore had disappeared. But digital forensics found something Whitmore thought he'd deleted. Email correspondence with an encrypted account, arranging Marcus's collection. Subject is ready. Age 12, IQ 156, no behavioral problems, family wealthy, will pay significant ransom. Alternatively, overseas buyer already interested. Acquisition window, August 15th, 22 hours. Marcus hadn't been kidnapped for ransom. He was being sold. The FBI's Cyber Crimes Division traced the encrypted account. It led to a server in Romania, then to another in Singapore, then to a dark web marketplace. On that marketplace, children were listed like products, ages, skills, talents, prices ranging from $50,000 to $500,000. Marcus Hartwell had been listed at $300,000. Status, acquired, in transit. But the marketplace also revealed something else. The 7 missing boys from Chen's investigation, they were all there, all listed, all acquired by the same buyer. Someone wasn't just collecting these children randomly. Someone had a specific preference. Gifted boys, ages 10 to 13, high IQ, musical or academic talent, and they'd been systematically acquiring them for over a decade. Agent Morton assembled a task force, FBI, Interpol, Europol. They had a digital trail, they had a buyer profile, they had a chance. And then, 6 days after Marcus vanished, they got their first real break, a name. Thomas Everett Crane, American citizen, age 68, last known residence, Providence, Rhode Island, former psychologist specializing in gifted children. Crane had been investigated in 1982 for inappropriate conduct with students. Charges were dropped. He relocated, changed careers, became an educational consultant, and he'd been recruiting for the collectors for 30 years. Crane wasn't just a recruiter. He was a selector, a talent scout. He identified gifted children, gained their families' trust, and delivered them to the network. FBI agents traced Crane to a compound in rural Pennsylvania. When they arrived with a warrant, they found a nightmare. The compound was a way station, a holding facility, where children were kept after acquisition before being transported overseas. Soundproofed rooms, security systems, medical equipment for sedation. And in those rooms they found 4 children, not Marcus, but 4 other boys, ages 11 to 14, drugged, malnourished, traumatized, but alive. Thomas Crane was arrested on site, charged with kidnapping, child trafficking, and conspiracy. He refused to speak, demanded a lawyer, showed no remorse. But Agent Morton had something Crane didn't expect. One of the rescued children could talk, and what he said would break the case wide open. There are more places, more compounds. Mr. Crane said we were going to the garden, a place where special children go, where rich people pay to own us. He said Marcus was already there. He said all 7 of them were, and they were waiting for more. The garden, not a metaphor, a real place. And Agent Morton had 2 weeks to find it before Marcus disappeared forever.
Thomas Crane sat in federal custody for 72 hours without saying a word. No confession, no cooperation, nothing. But Agent Morton had leverage. The 4 rescued children, the digital evidence, the compound. Crane was facing life in prison, multiple life sentences. On day 4, Morton made Crane an offer. Full cooperation in exchange for consideration at sentencing. Help us find Marcus and the others, and the death penalty is off the table. Thomas Crane smiled, and finally he spoke. You think you've caught the wolf, Agent Morton. You've caught a hunting dog. The collectors are far bigger than you imagine, far more organized, far more protected. For the next 14 hours, Thomas Crane detailed an organization that had been operating since the 1950s, a network of recruiters, transporters, and facilitators spanning 17 countries, lawyers who handled paperwork, doctors who provided medical clearances, officials who looked the other way, all paid handsomely to keep the collectors running. But the real horror was the garden itself. Not in America, not in Europe, an island, privately owned, off the coast of Indonesia, outside any jurisdiction, protected by corrupt local government and private security. The garden is where the children are prepared, trained, made compliant before being sold to their final owners. Some buyers want them immediately, others want them educated first. The children lived in dormitories, supervised by handlers, given lessons in language, music,
academics, whatever their future owners desired. Crane said the 7 boys, including Marcus, were being held in a special section reserved for the highest-paying client, a buyer who'd commissioned these specific children years in advance. Someone who wanted gifted children, someone who was willing to wait, someone with nearly unlimited resources. "Who was the buyer?" asked Agent Morton. "I don't know his real name," Crane said. "No one does. We call him the patron. He's been acquiring gifted children for 20 years. He pays top dollar, and he's very, very specific about what he wants." Agent Morton had a location, he had a timeline, but he had a problem. The garden was sovereign territory, no extradition, no jurisdiction, and a frontal assault would result in the children being killed, standard protocol for the collectors if compromised. Agent Morton needed help. He called in favors, CIA, Interpol, SEAL Team 6 was briefed, but even they couldn't guarantee the children's safety. And then Detective Chen had an idea, a dangerous idea, but the only one that might work. "We can't raid the garden, but we can infiltrate it. The collectors are still operating, still acquiring. They don't know we've flipped Crane. We use him. We send in an agent posing as a new acquisition. Once inside, they locate the children, signal our position, and we extract simultaneously, from inside and outside." It was insane. It was illegal. It violated a dozen international laws, but it was the only way to get those children alive. The FBI recruited a specialist, a female agent, young-looking enough to pass for 16, Sarah Martinez, Undercover Division. She volunteered. Martinez would be acquired through the collector's network, transported to the garden. Once inside, she'd make contact with Marcus and the others, and when the extraction team arrived, she'd get them out or die trying. The operation was codenamed Harvest Moon. Authorization came from the Attorney General, deniability for everyone involved. If it failed, no one would claim responsibility. Thomas Crane would facilitate Martinez's acquisition. He'd make contact with the collectors, arrange her transport, and pray they didn't realize he'd been compromised. "I have a new candidate, female, age 16, musical prodigy, family is wealthy, she's ready for acquisition," Crane said on a call. The collectors took the bait. Collection was scheduled for October 3rd, 6 weeks after Marcus vanished. Martinez had one chance, one insertion, and approximately 48 hours inside the garden before her cover would be blown. Agent Morton assembled the extraction team, military contractors, former special forces, people who could operate in gray areas without official sanction. Everything was ready, the plan was set, and then 3 days before the operation, something happened that changed everything. Marcus Hartwell's mother, Elizabeth, received a phone call. "Mrs. Hartwell, your son is alive. If you want him to stay that way, you'll wire $5 million to the following account within 24 hours. If you contact the FBI, he dies." The collectors knew, and they were moving up their timeline.
The ransom call changed everything. If the collectors were demanding payment, it meant one of two things. They were getting nervous, or they were preparing to liquidate assets. Either way, Marcus and the other children were in immediate danger. Agent Morton had a choice: wire the money and hope the collectors kept their word, or move up the extraction and risk the children's lives. "I'll pay anything, 5 million, 10 million, whatever they want. Just bring my son home," Elizabeth said with fear in her voice. Morton replied, "Ma'am, if we pay, there's no guarantee they'll release Marcus. These people don't keep promises. They're criminals." "And if we don't pay, what happens then?" Morton made a decision. They would pay the ransom,
but they would also move forward with the extraction. Simultaneous operations, one as cover for the other. The ransom would be wired as requested, but it would be tagged, trackable, leading the FBI directly to the collectors' financial network. And while the collectors were distracted counting their money, Agent Martinez would be inserted into the garden. October 3rd arrived. Martinez, posing as Jennifer Walsh, a runaway piano prodigy, was acquired from a staged location in New York. Thomas Crane made the handoff to a collector operative. Martinez was drugged, a mild sedative she'd built tolerance to. She was transported in a van, then a private plane, then a boat. 36 hours later, she arrived at the garden. The island was larger than satellite imagery suggested. Compound buildings, guard towers, private airstrip. This wasn't just a way station, this was a permanent operation. Martinez was processed, medical exam, photographed, assigned to Dormitory 7, the special section where the patrons' acquisitions were kept. And that's when she saw them. 7 boys, ages 10 to 14, sitting in a common room, reading, playing chess, looking eerily calm. Marcus Hartwell looked up when Martinez entered. Their eyes met. She gave the slightest nod, a signal that rescue was coming. But Marcus's response was unexpected. He looked away, no recognition, no hope, like he'd given up. Or like he'd been broken. That night, after lights out, Martinez made contact. She whispered to Marcus through the darkness, "Marcus, I'm FBI. We're getting you out. Tomorrow night, you and the others. Be ready." Marcus whispered, "There's no getting out. The patron owns us now. Escape means they kill our families. They showed us proof, photos of our houses, our parents, our siblings. We tried to fight at first, but they show you things, do things, until you understand that obedience is the only option." The children hadn't just been kidnapped, they'd been systematically broken, convinced that cooperation was survival, that their families would die if they resisted. Martinez activated her emergency beacon. The extraction needed to happen now, before the children were moved, before their spirits were completely destroyed. 300 miles away, Agent Morton received the signal. The extraction team launched immediately. Seal insertion by sea. Timeline, 8 hours. But the collectors had been watching. They'd noticed the ransom money being traced. They'd found the tracking device on Martinez.
And they knew a raid was coming. The garden security chief made a call to the patron, asking for instructions, asking what to do with the children. The patron said, "Execute the contingency protocol, eliminate all evidence, relocate to backup facility, leave nothing for the authorities to find." Contingency protocol meant one thing: kill the children, burn the compound, disappear. Martinez knew something was wrong. Guards who'd been routine were now carrying weapons. Staff were evacuating. The compound was being abandoned. She had minutes, maybe less, and she was alone with 7 traumatized children who'd been conditioned not to fight back. "Listen to me, all of you. Your families are alive. They're safe. The FBI is protecting them, but guards are coming to kill us right now. We can die here or we can fight. Your choice." And for the first time in weeks, Marcus Hartwell's eyes showed something other than emptiness. They showed rage.
Agent Sarah Martinez had 60 seconds, maybe less. 7 traumatized children who'd been taught that resistance meant death, and armed guards approaching with orders to eliminate all evidence. But she'd underestimated one thing: the will to survive when you finally have hope. "They're going to kill us anyway. We have nothing left to lose." Martinez moved fast. Beds were overturned as barricades. Metal bed frames became weapons. A chess set, pieces sharpened on concrete. Anything that could buy them time. The dormitory door was solid wood. One entrance, one exit. Martinez positioned the boys behind cover and stood at the door with a bed frame. And then the footsteps arrived. 3 guards, armed with pistols. Standard procedure was quick and clean. 2 shots per child, burn the building, leave. But when they opened that door, they didn't find compliant victims. Martinez drove the bed frame into the first guard's throat. He went down choking. The second guard raised his weapon, but 14-year-old James Rodriguez threw a chess piece, a sharpened king with the accuracy of a pitcher who'd won state championships. It caught the guard in the eye. He screamed, weapon dropping. The third guard got off 2 shots. One went wide, the other hit Martinez in the shoulder. She went down, and Marcus Hartwell did something his mother would have never believed. He picked up the gun. Marcus had never held a gun. His hands shook so badly he could barely aim. But when the guard turned toward him, Marcus pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the guard in the leg. Not lethal, but enough. The guard went down. Martinez, bleeding from her shoulder, secured all 3 guards with their own restraints. "Good job, all of you, but this isn't over. More will come." And she was right. The compound security chief called for backup. 6 more guards were dispatched to dormitory 7. Orders: shoot on sight. But outside, in the darkness of the Indonesian night, something else was happening. 8 U.S. Navy SEALs hit the beach. No insignia, no identification. Officially, they weren't there. This was an illegal operation in sovereign territory. If they were caught, the U.S. government would deny everything. Team leader Lieutenant Commander Jake Carson had one objective: extract the children and the FBI agent. Collateral damage was acceptable. The compound security force was not.
The compound had 12 guards total, 6 approaching the dormitory, 6 at various security posts. The SEALs moved like shadows. Perimeter guards went down in seconds. No shots fired, suppressed weapons, and hand-to-hand combat. By the time the alarm was raised, SEAL team was already inside the compound. Inside Dormitory 7, Martinez heard gunfire, not the sporadic shots of guards, sustained professional fire. The cavalry had arrived. Martinez said to children, "That's our ride. Stay behind me. When I say move, you run and don't look back." But the garden security chief had one last order from the patron. If extraction occurred, activate the compound's self-destruct. Burn everything. Leave no evidence. He pressed the button. Incendiary charges throughout the compound began their 30-second countdown. Lieutenant Carson's headset crackled. His tech specialist had detected the activation. "Commander, compound is rigged to blow. Multiple charges. 30 seconds. We need to abort." Carson replied, "Negative. We don't leave without the kids. Alpha Team, find that dormitory. Bravo, secure extraction point. We have 25 seconds." Martinez kicked open the dormitory door. Outside was chaos. Fires already starting. Guards engaging SEALs. She grabbed Marcus. "Stay together. Follow the soldiers. This way! Move, move, move!" They ran. 7 children, 1 wounded FBI agent, and 8 SEALs. Behind them, the garden erupted. Buildings exploded. Ammunition cooked off. The jungle lit up like daylight. They reached the beach with 4 seconds to spare. The main compound building, the one containing all records, all evidence, detonated in a fireball visible from miles. The inflatable boats powered toward the waiting submarine. Behind them, the garden burned. Millions of dollars in infrastructure, decades of operation, gone. But not the most important thing, not the children. On the submarine, a Navy medic treated Martinez's gunshot wound. Marcus sat beside her, still clutching the gun he'd taken. His hands were still shaking. Martinez said gently, "Marcus, you can put it down now. You're safe." "I shot someone. I'm 12 years old and I shot someone." "You saved our lives. You saved yourself. That's all that matters," Martinez said. But Marcus would carry that moment for the rest of his life, the moment he stopped being a child and became a survivor.
20 hours later, the submarine surfaced off the coast of Guam. The children were transferred to a U.S. military hospital. Their families were notified. Elizabeth Hartwell received the call at 3 a.m. Her son was alive, coming home. But across the world, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, another phone call was being made. The garden is gone. Completely destroyed. The children are in U.S. custody. Crane is still cooperating with the FBI. Then we shut down everything, every operation, every connection. We go dark, completely dark, and we wait. Because the patron knew something the FBI didn't yet. The garden wasn't the only facility. It wasn't even the largest, and the real collection was just beginning.
November 1987. The 7 boys returned home as heroes. The media called them survivors, brave, resilient. But the truth was more complicated. Marcus Hartwell stepped off the plane and into his mother's arms. She held him for 5 minutes without letting go, without speaking, just holding the child she thought she'd lost forever. But when they got home, when the cameras left, when it was just the 2 of them in Marcus's bedroom, the room he'd been taken from, Marcus couldn't sleep there. He couldn't even walk inside. The physical scars were minimal, a few bruises, malnutrition, but the psychological damage was profound. Night terrors, panic attacks, hypervigilance, fear of being alone, fear of being touched, fear of sleep. Dr. Patricia Morrison was assigned as Marcus's psychiatrist. She specialized in childhood trauma, but even she had never treated a case quite like this. Dr. Morrison, in an interview, said, "Marcus presented with severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, and what we call a shattered worldview. He'd been raised to believe the world was safe, that adults were trustworthy, that being special was a gift. All of that was destroyed in one night." The other 6 boys faced similar challenges. Some regressed, bedwetting, afraid of the dark. Others became aggressive, fighting at school, lashing out at family. All of them were haunted by what they'd experienced. But they'd also formed a bond, 7 boys who'd survived together, who understood what the others were going through in ways no one else could. Agent Morton arranged group therapy sessions. Once a week, the 7 would meet, talk, or sometimes just sit in silence together. It helped. Marcus formed the closest friendship with James Rodriguez, the boy who'd thrown the chess piece. They'd saved each other's lives. That created a bond stronger than words. But while the boys were healing, Agent Morton was hunting, because the garden's destruction hadn't ended the collectors. It had only slowed them down. The ransom money had been tracked. It led to accounts in the Cayman Islands, then to shell corporations in Luxembourg, then to a network of businesses that all connected to one person. But every time Morton got close to identifying the patron, the trail went cold. Lawyers would appear, evidence would disappear, witnesses would refuse to talk. The patron was protected by money, by power, by connections that reached into the highest levels of government and business. Thomas Crane, still in federal custody, provided what information he could. But even Crane had never met the patron face to face. Everything was handled through intermediaries, anonymous communications, untraceable payments. "The patron is careful, paranoid," Crane said. "He's been doing this for decades and never been caught because he never takes unnecessary risks. He never meets acquisitions personally. He never leaves evidence." But Crane did offer one piece of useful information. The patron had a pattern, a preference.
He always attended the final selection of children before purchase. He couldn't resist. He had to see them, assess them personally. He does it through video conference, secure, encrypted, untraceable. But there's always a feed, a camera, and if you could find the location he broadcasts from, you could find him. Meanwhile, the FBI's International Task Force was making progress. 43 children who'd been under surveillance by the collectors were placed in protective custody. Their families were warned. Their schools were monitored. And slowly, carefully, the FBI began to dismantle the collectors' network. Recruiters in 6 states were arrested. A transport hub in Mexico was raided. 12 more children rescued. A dormitory facility in the Philippines was shut down. 8 children freed.
The media called it Operation Harvest Moon, the largest coordinated action against child trafficking in U.S. history. 73 arrests, 89 children recovered. And it all started because one detective, Sarah Chen, noticed a pattern. But for every success, there were failures. Children who disappeared before the FBI could reach them, leads that went cold, witnesses who died in suspicious accidents. The collectors were wounded but not destroyed, and the patron remained free. 1 year after Marcus's rescue, on the anniversary of his kidnapping, something arrived at the Hartwell estate. A package. No return address, delivered by private courier who couldn't be traced. Inside was a photograph, recent, taken from outside the Hartwell estate through Marcus's bedroom window. And on the back of the photograph, a message, handwritten, elegant script. He was mine once. He will be mine again. Time is infinite. Patience is virtue. The patron. Elizabeth called Agent Morton immediately. He arrived within the hour. Security was doubled. The FBI put round-the-clock surveillance on the estate. But Morton knew the truth. As long as the patron was free, Marcus would never truly be safe. And so Agent Morton made a decision, one that would define the rest of his career. He would not rest until the patron was identified, arrested, and prosecuted, no matter how long it took. 2 years became 3. 3 became 5. The investigation continued. Morton became obsessed. His marriage suffered. His health declined, but he couldn't let it go. And then, in 1992, 5 years after Marcus's rescue, Morton got the break he'd been waiting for. A new collector operative was arrested in Seattle, a recruiter who'd been more careless than the others. On his computer, the FBI found something. Video conference logs, encrypted but recoverable, showing meetings between the recruiter and someone else, someone whose voice had been disguised but whose background wasn't. FBI analysts worked for weeks enhancing the video, analyzing reflections in windows, identifying architectural details, and finally, they found it. A reflection in a glass cabinet behind the mysterious figure, clear enough to show a magazine cover, a specific issue with a date. That magazine was only distributed to members of an exclusive club, the Metropolitan Society of New York. Membership, 300 people, all wealthy, all influential. Morton brought the evidence to the U.S. attorney, but the response was not what he expected. Agent Morton, William Ashford, is one of the most prominent men in America. He has lunch with senators. He funds hospitals. You can't accuse someone like that without ironclad proof. Morton replied, I have proof, financial records, video evidence, testimony from Thomas Crane.
Prosecutor cut in. From a convicted felon trying to reduce his sentence. Any defense attorney will shred that in court. We need more. Morton needed something Ashford couldn't deny, something that would force prosecution, something irrefutable.
Marcus Hartwell was 17 years old, a high school senior. He'd spent 5 years in therapy, 5 years trying to rebuild his life, 5 years trying to forget. He rarely spoke about what happened. To his therapist, yes. To James Rodriguez, sometimes, but to others, never. It was a closed chapter, a nightmare he'd survived and moved past. Until Agent Morton knocked on his door. Elizabeth Hartwell knew why Morton was there. She'd been dreading this moment for 5 years. "No, absolutely not. My son has been through enough. I won't let you traumatize him again." "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand, but William Ashford is still out there, still operating, still acquiring children. We've identified him, but we can't prosecute without testimony." "Then find another way. Use the other boys. Use anyone but Marcus." Marcus is the only one who can place Ashford at the garden, the only one who saw him via video conference during selection. The others were sedated or isolated. Marcus saw him. Marcus can identify him. And then Marcus appeared on the stairs. He'd been listening. "How many children has he taken since me?" "We don't know for certain. The garden's records were destroyed, but based on collector operations we've dismantled, conservatively, 23. 23 children because I was too scared to testify? No, 23 children because William Ashford is evil, not because of you, never because of you. But I could stop him now if I testify." "Marcus, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Mom, I've spent 5 years afraid of sleeping, afraid of being alone, afraid of him. If I don't do this, I'll be afraid for the rest of my life. But if I face him in court, if I tell the truth about what he did, maybe I can finally stop being afraid." 3 months later, the federal grand jury indicted William Edward Ashford III on 47 counts of conspiracy, child trafficking, kidnapping, and racketeering. The arrest sent shockwaves through American society. Ashford's foundation was suspended, his businesses were investigated, his name was removed from buildings and endowments. But Ashford's legal team was formidable. 7 attorneys, unlimited resources, and a strategy: attack the credibility of the witnesses. "My client is innocent. These charges are based on the testimony of convicted felons and traumatized children whose memories have been compromised by years of therapy and suggestion." The trial began in March 1993, Federal Courthouse, Manhattan, Judge Helena Morrison presiding. Media called it the trial of the decade. Agent Morton was the prosecution's first witness. He detailed the investigation, the pattern, the evidence, the rescue: methodical, professional, unshakable. Then came Thomas Crane, now 70 years old, serving life in federal prison. He testified about his role as recruiter, about the garden, about the patron. "I met William Ashford in 1975. He approached me at a conference on gifted education. He said he was interested in private tutoring opportunities. That was code. I knew what he really wanted. Over 18 years, I acquired 41 children for him. He paid between $200,000 and $500,000 per child, depending on their talents. He was specific: boys only, ages 10 to 13, exceptional intelligence or artistic ability."
But on cross-examination, Ashford's attorneys attacked. "Mr. Crane, isn't it true you're testifying in exchange for a reduced sentence?" "Yes." "So you have every reason to lie, to give the prosecution what they want in exchange for leniency. You'd say anything to get out of prison, wouldn't you?" "I'd say anything true.
I've spent 5 years in prison because of my crimes. I deserve to be here, but William Ashford deserves to be here more. The prosecution knew Crane's testimony alone wouldn't be enough. They needed Marcus. The night before Marcus was scheduled to testify, Agent Morton visited him at his hotel. "You can still back out. It's not too late. I can find another way." "I need to do this," said Marcus. "For me, for the others, for the 23 children he took after me." The next morning, Marcus Jonathan Hartwell, age 18, walked into the courtroom. Cameras weren't allowed for his testimony. He was a minor when the crimes occurred, but the courtroom was packed. William Ashford sat at the defense table. First time Marcus had seen him in person. First time he'd seen the man who'd bought him. Marcus took the stand, was sworn in, and for the next 4 hours he told his story. "I remember the video conference. It was 2 days after I arrived at the garden. They brought all 7 of us into a room. There was a screen, and on that screen was him. He asked us questions, what instruments we played, what our favorite subjects were, what we wanted to be when we grew up, like he was interviewing us for a job. And then he said we were special, that we'd been chosen, that we should feel honored to be part of his collection. Collection, like we were paintings or sculptures, objects to own." Marcus detailed the psychological conditioning, the threats against families, the constant surveillance, the complete control. And then the prosecutor asked the critical question. "Marcus, do you see the man from the video conference in this courtroom today?" "Yes." "Can you point him out?" "He's sitting right there at the defense table, William Ashford." The defense's cross-examination was brutal. They questioned Marcus's memory, suggested his therapists had planted false memories, implied he was motivated by a desire for attention or a book deal. "Mr. Hartwell, isn't it true you've been in therapy for 6 years, and isn't it possible your therapists have influenced what you remember?" "Dr. Morrison has never told me what to remember. She's helped me process what I already remember. And I remember his face. I see it every night in my nightmares." The defense tried to break him, but Marcus had survived the garden. A defense attorney didn't scare him anymore. 6 other survivors testified: James Rodriguez, David Chen, Timothy Walsh, each one identifying Ashford, each one detailing their experiences. And then the prosecution rested. The defense called character witnesses, business leaders, philanthropists, people who testified that Ashford was a good man, a charitable man, incapable of such horrors. But they couldn't explain the financial records, the travel patterns, the video evidence, the testimony of 7 children who all identified him. Closing arguments lasted 2 days. The prosecution painted Ashford as a predator who'd used his wealth and philanthropy as cover for monstrous crimes. The defense argued reasonable doubt, unreliable witnesses, circumstantial evidence, a rush of judgment against a prominent man. The jury deliberated for 3 days.
March 24, 1993. After 72 hours of deliberation, the jury had reached a verdict. Marcus sat in the gallery between his mother and James Rodriguez. Agent Morton was behind them, Detective Chen beside him. 7 families who'd lived through hell waited to hear if justice would finally be served. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Morrison asked. "We have, Your Honor." Judge Morrison reviewed the verdict form. Her face revealed nothing. She handed it back to the bailiff, who returned it to the foreman. "The defendant will rise." On count 1, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. On count 2, child trafficking, guilty. On count 3, racketeering, guilty. 47 counts, 47 guilty verdicts on every single charge. Marcus didn't cry, didn't celebrate. He just sat, staring at Ashford, watching the man who'd tried to own him realize he'd lost. William Edward Ashford III, billionaire philanthropist, was convicted of operating one of the most sophisticated child trafficking networks in modern history. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The prosecution sought maximum penalties, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. At sentencing, Judge Morrison allowed victim impact statements. Marcus was the first to speak. "You thought you owned me. You thought because you paid money I was your property, but you were wrong. You took 2 months of my life. You traumatized me. You gave me nightmares that lasted years, but you didn't break me. You didn't own me. You never owned any of us. I'm 18 years old now. I'm going to college. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to be happy. And you're going to prison forever. And that's exactly what you deserve." 6 other boys made statements. Parents made statements. Agent Morton made a statement detailing Ashford's decades of crimes. And then Judge Morrison spoke. "Mr. Ashford, in my 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a defendant whose crimes were so calculated, so prolonged, and so utterly devoid of human empathy. You used your wealth, your influence, and your public persona as a champion of children to prey upon the most vulnerable. You didn't just commit crimes, you perverted every institution meant to protect children. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without possibility of parole on each of the 47 counts, to be served consecutively. You will never be free again." William Edward Ashford was transferred to ADX Florence, America's highest security prison. He would spend the rest of his life in a cell, alone, exactly as he deserved. But the investigation wasn't over. Ashford's network was vast. His arrest led to 63 additional arrests worldwide. 12 more trafficking operations were dismantled. In total, Operation Harvest Moon resulted in the rescue of 147 children. Agent Douglas Morton received the FBI's highest civilian honor. Detective Sarah Chen was promoted to lead Connecticut's Crimes Against Children unit. Agent Martinez recovered from her injuries and continued undercover work, saving dozens more children. But the real heroes were the survivors. Marcus Hartwell enrolled at Juilliard. He became a violinist. He performed at Carnegie Hall, something he'd done once before at age 11 and something the Garden had tried to take him from it forever. James Rodriguez became a therapist, specializing in childhood trauma. David Chen went into law enforcement. Timothy Walsh became a teacher. 7 boys who'd been stolen, 7 boys who'd survived, 7 boys who refused to let their trauma define them. They stayed in touch, met annually on the anniversary of their rescue, not to dwell on what happened, but to celebrate what they'd overcome. And every year, they'd raise a toast to the children who weren't as lucky, to the agents who saved them, and to each other, because they understood something most people never would. Survival is just the beginning. Healing is the real victory.
37 years after Marcus Hartwell vanished from his bedroom, he stands in front of a classroom. Not at Juilliard, at a small community center in Hartford, Connecticut. He's teaching violin to children who can't afford private lessons, children from difficult backgrounds, children who need to know that music can be healing. Marcus never forgot what it felt like to be 12 years old and powerless, and he spent his adult life making sure other children have the power he didn't. In 1995, Marcus and the other 6 survivors established the Harvest Moon Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to trafficking prevention and survivor support. The foundation provides therapy, education, and advocacy for trafficking survivors. It trains law enforcement. It lobbies for stronger laws. It saved thousands of children. Elizabeth Hartwell, Marcus's mother, serves as the foundation's president. She turned her nightmare into purpose. Her advocacy led to the passage of the Hartwell Act in 2001, federal legislation that increased penalties for child trafficking and provided more resources for victims. Detective Sarah Chen retired from the force in 2010, but she still volunteers with the foundation. She trains detectives on how to identify trafficking patterns, how to recognize the signs, how to save children before it's too late. Agent Douglas Morton passed away in 2018 at age 86. He spent his retirement writing a memoir about the case. The proceeds went entirely to the Harvest Moon Foundation. At his funeral, Marcus said Morton was the bravest person he'd ever known, not because he faced armed guards or traveled to dangerous places, but because he never gave up, never stopped fighting, never let the evil he saw destroy his faith in humanity. Thomas Crane died in prison in 2015. He spent his final years writing letters to the children he'd helped traffic, apologizing, trying to make amends. Most of those letters went unanswered. But Marcus wrote back once. He told Crane that forgiveness wasn't something he could give, but he could acknowledge that Crane's cooperation had saved lives, and that had to count for something. William Edward Ashford III remains in ADX Florence, now 92 years old, still serving 47 consecutive life sentences, still showing no remorse, still insisting he did nothing wrong. He will die in prison, alone, forgotten by the world that once celebrated him. But the fight against trafficking continues, even now, even today.
The FBI estimates that hundreds of thousands of children are trafficked in the United States every year, millions worldwide. The garden is gone, but 1,000 gardens remain. New networks emerge, new predators arise, new children disappear. But there are also new fighters, new investigators, new survivors who become advocates. The cycle continues. Evil persists, but so does resistance. On August 15, 2024, the 37th anniversary of his abduction, Marcus Hartwell returned to the Hartwell estate. He hadn't been there in decades, couldn't. The memories were too heavy. But today, he walked through those gates, climbed those stairs, stood in front of the bedroom he'd been taken from. His mother had preserved the room exactly as it was. She'd never changed it, couldn't. It was frozen in time, August 15, 1987. Marcus stood in the doorway, and for the first time in 37 years, he walked inside. He sat on the bed, the same bed he'd slept in as a child, the bed he'd been stolen from. And then he picked up the violin that still sat on the desk, the one he'd been practicing with that last day before everything changed. He tuned it, rosined the bow, and he played. Not a concert piece, not a performance, just a simple melody, one his mother used to sing to him when he was small. And when he finished, Marcus stood, looked around the room one last time, and he whispered, "You didn't win. You took 2 months, but I took back my life."
He closed the door behind him, and this time when he left that room, he knew he'd never need to go back. Because the 12-year-old boy who'd been taken was gone, replaced by a man who'd survived, who'd healed, who'd helped others heal. That night, the 7 survivors gathered as they did every year, but this time there was something different, something lighter. Marcus told them about returning to the room, about playing the violin, about finally letting go. And for the first time in 37 years, when they raised their glasses, the toast was different. To the children we were, to the men we became, to the lives we reclaimed, to freedom. The story of Marcus Hartwell and the Harvest Moon operation isn't just about the horrors of trafficking. It's about the resilience of survivors, the dedication of those who fight for justice, and the power of choosing to heal. It's about remembering that evil is real, but so is goodness, so is courage, so is hope. Today, Marcus Hartwell is 49 years old. He's married. He has 2 daughters. He teaches music. He advocates for survivors. He lives. And somewhere, there's a child who's about to be rescued, a child who will survive, a child who will heal, because people like Marcus and Morton and Chen refused to look away. The fight continues. It always will. As long as there are predators, there will be protectors. As long as there are victims, there will be advocates. And as long as there are survivors like Marcus Hartwell, there will be hope. If you suspect human trafficking, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. If you know a child who is being abused or exploited, call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. You could save a life. You could be someone's Agent Morton, someone's Detective Chen, someone's hope. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not the darkness that exists, but the light that fights back. In memory of all the children who didn't make it home, and in honor of all those who brought them back.